Hey everybody, and welcome to another new episode of Time Extend. My name is Adam Ismail, and as I am every episode, today I'm joined with the wonderful
Brendan Norrison, and today we've actually got a bit of a treat for you. Usually we'd say we've got a featured discussion and then something else, but today we've actually got another brand new racing game to discuss, Adam. We've been spoiled for choice recently.
it's none other than Assetto Corsa Competizione, and this show is coming just a week after we had our podcast on Team Sonic Racing, which was a lot of fun to do. But June is going to be a very busy month for us. I'm actually off to the Canadian Grand Prix in a couple days after I record this, so I won't have a lot of time to record episodes of the show because I'll be watching Formula One cars go around the track, which is really cool. But to make up for that, we're doing this episode on Assetto Corsa right now, which we're really happy to do because we've both kind of been dipping our toes into this franchise. I mean, Brendan, you've had a little more experience than I have because you've been playing the game in early access, but it's new for me, and I'm really enjoying it. How about you?
Oh yeah, definitely. I picked up the early access as one of the first games I actually got when I bought my gaming PC, purely because I needed some form of racing sim to play, and I wasn't actually a massive fan of the original Assetto Corsa, which I suppose makes this podcast interesting actually. But as far as Competizione is concerned, this is pretty much the kind of sim that we've been looking for when you consider our conversations, Adam. Like, it's very focused, it doesn't try to do too much at all, and you can see that Kunos really went out their way to replicate the GT3 Blanc Pawn series that's based upon, rather than try to tick every box that's available for the racing genre.
Yeah, and I actually just recently wrote a story for my day job, which is I'm a staff writer at a website called Tom's Guide. Normally I cover phones, but it's a pretty autonomous website, so we're able to talk about anything relatively techie that we're interested in. So I decided to write about Assetto Corsa, and that's something I tried to express in that article. If you go check it out, and it's just basically like it's just very laser focused on doing one thing, and that is emulating, just obviously fully licensed Blanc Pawn GT3 series content, and just focused entirely around that discipline of racing. And that's something that we don't really get anymore. Back in the day, you'd have your Toka race drivers and whatnot that would be a little bit more focused. You'd have your games based around BTCC or WTCC, or the old Simbin GTR games that were FIA GT licensed, I believe. But today, everything's a lot more generalist. Project Cars does, I think, probably the best possible job you could do trying to cover as many different series as possible, but I think it kind of goes without saying it's fundamentally impossible to be able to render a single discipline of racing with the sort of attention and care and depth that you could if to have so many different disciplines in the game. Obviously something's going to be a little bit lost somewhere, whereas Kunos can very much focus on the GT3 style of driving, which is obviously pretty popular around the world and pretty accessible. You have your Pro-Am drivers who are people who own dealerships and whatnot, and just rich, wealthy, well-off guys who aren't necessarily experts still able to enjoy themselves on the track. Your gentleman racers. So it just seems to be a overall good category, I would say, to do a game like this in.
Yeah, it's pretty much the perfect motorsport series you could ask for, because you touched on accessibility in the real life motorsport, and even in the game, like, this is a full-on proper racing sim. Let's not beat around the bush here, but when it comes to the driving, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Kunos have dumbed something down initially because you aren't careening off the track at the first possible opportunity. But and this is something that a lot of maybe racing games get wrong, in a sense that when you get to drive the racing cars in a game, it's always assumed that, oh, this is when it gets difficult because you've got to keep this incredible monster on the road. But in the GT3 series, we've got these supercars that would be pretty crazy to drive normally, but they've been tuned specifically to drive on these tracks during the Blanc Pawn series. And as a result, like, every car just, it feels so intuitive to drive right away. And that's one of the reasons that I'm really enjoying myself, because it's more about shaving those milliseconds off the lap times and maybe not finishing last every so often. rather than you drive a car and you're like, right, I'm going to have to spend 50 laps getting to know this, because whether it's the Porsche, the Nissan, or even the Bentley that's in there, they all have their own individual characteristics when it comes to driving them, but they don't feel impossible, and I feel that's a huge plus point for the game.
Yeah, and it reminds me a lot of what Kaz said in the run-up to when GT Sport came out, which is that real isn't necessarily difficult. To a certain extent, like, yes, I'm sure it's hard to drive a racing car at speed and do it very well and do it consistently and not screw up, but we all get in our cars every single day and drive. We're not driving in anger, but we're able to operate this relatively complex machine in a way that doesn't just have us constantly flying off the road. So to that end, being able to get into a GT3 style car, which, as we said, is a relatively forgiving kind of race car that's accessible, it shouldn't be that hard to at least get through the track without killing yourself. The challenge comes in terms of obviously optimizing, your pace and being able to hit those apexes and braking points and whatnot and do it properly and maximize your grip. But just getting around the track shouldn't be a problem. And I feel like a lot of sim racing titles over the years have failed. They've kind of missed out on that. And I would even go so far as to say you get some arcade racers these days I feel like are much more hard to drive than the best simulators we have now. Like it might have been Payback, but I'm thinking especially of Need for Speed 2015, where I thought the physics in that game were so wonky. It was way more difficult than any simulator I've ever played. So yeah, I think developers are starting to understand this. I think they're starting to pick up on it. And the cool thing about Assetto Corsa is that although obviously, the ideal experience is to use a wheel and whatnot, and I have one, but unfortunately my new apartment, I don't really have enough room to set it up. So I've been playing with the DualShock 4, and the game is, I think there's some tuning that they'll probably do down the line, because right now you can't even really map all of the buttons on the DualShock to play the game. Like, there's a default mapping, but they don't let you change it, and that's coming in a later update. But even so, I'm surprised that the game does play, perfectly well with the DualShock. I can, I feel like I have control over the car, and that's not something that I think we're used to seeing in a lot of the hardcore PC sims that pretty much just tell you, like, this is the only way to play the game and this is how you have to do it. Because, like, I understand that in iRacing, but Assetto Corsa is still ostensibly, if you want it to be, it can just be a totally solitary single player experience. So I like that they give you that choice.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of the drivability of the cars, we talked about how when a game has such large scope, not as much attention can be paid to every individual element, and I think that even applies to, like, in games like Project Cars 2, the car roster and how the cars handled, because especially in that game there were some cars I felt drove fantastic, and then there were other ones I just couldn't wrap my head around. And it wasn't much like Need for Speed 2015, ironically. It wasn't because I felt as if it was a difficult challenge, but rather the car would act in a way I wouldn't expect a car to act. And that issue's bypassed here because there just seems to have been such an understanding for what makes GT3 race cars unique, and it's weirdly like arcade racery in that nature. Like, it almost feels as if most people could pick this game up and drive the cars to varying degrees of success, but when you were to say give somebody a go with the original Assetto Corsa in one of the mini supercars or Ferraris and that type of thing, it can be hard to even make it round one high speed corner. But I really don't think people would have that issue here, and it's fair play to Kunos for nailing it, because one of the aspects we discussed offline prior to the pod as well was that the traction control was mandatory, because that's the way the sport works, and that's something that could really tick off a lot of people who are interested in sim racing, because that element of the motorsport, it's ironic because in the kind of digital world it's seen as a admitting defeat almost. You had to use the traction control rather than trying to handle the car without it. But here it's a case of, no, this is how the motorsport works, and this is how we want you to drive in the game. And in my opinion, it's all the better for it, because I jumped into a random multiplayer lobby. I've not done much multiplayer so far, but I just had a drive around, and it was really refreshing, like seeing and maybe this is just because it is PC players in such a niche game, everyone seemed to be a relative skill level in the sense that they could stay on the track, they could battle for lap times, and it just seemed like a nice general atmosphere, and actually reminded me almost a bit of the way GT Sports like GR4 class works, where it isn't quite at that uber race level where the cars can spin out if you don't handle them correctly, but the cars are just powerful enough and have enough grip that you can get some really exciting racing going.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how I think I started my career and I jumped into an Audi R8 was what I picked as my team's car, or what my team's chassis, and it defaulted to like, I think the traction control is 8 levels, and at first I couldn't actually find the setting for a traction control. I didn't realize it's in kind of the car tuning options. It's not in the overall difficulty settings, which is where you find stability control. So once I found that, it was at like, I think it was like fully maxed at 8 or something like that, because there might have been rain in the session. So the game dynamically, I guess if you're going out and it's like a wet qualifying or something like that, it will default to max traction control, and then if it's not, then it'll be at like 5 or 6. So I noticed a big difference in the handling even between like 8 and 6. I was able to get the tail out a little bit more when I lowered it, but when it was maxed out, there was no losing that car. Like, I'm sure I couldn't have been as fast as I wanted to be, because obviously you need a little bit of rotation there. But I wasn't going to lose the car at all when the traction control was maxed out, which I was thinking like, yeah, this would obviously bother a lot of people, right? For all the reasons you mentioned. But this is a series where traction control is allowed. So it's nice that, I don't know, if you're someone who's kind of learning the ropes, and I would consider myself one of those people because I don't usually play hardcore sims and I'm trying to get into them more. It's nice to know that you can play around with that and be able to achieve a setting where you're not fighting with the car as much during a race, because one of like the horrifying things and like the barriers to getting into online sim racing multiplayer is that if you have a weak grasp of your vehicle, there's no way that you could ever be able to race against another person or hone your racecraft reliably. You're just going to cause accidents and people are going to hate you, and it's very intimidating. So the game, the physics are robust enough to allow you to explore without endangering your fellow competitors, which is definitely a good thing, I would say.
Yeah, and it's an area of the hardcore sim specifically that has been missing. Not to draw too many comparisons to it, but GT Sport understood the requirement to reward people for learning racecraft and giving them a platform to do so through the daily races. And although Competizione doesn't go that far, it does have a driver rating system in place, but it seems fairly complex. I haven't quite been able to work out exactly what it tracks and what impacts it, but outside of that rating system, it seems to encourage you to have a go purely based on the way the cars handle and the way the races are set up. So that's the other thing about the GT3 series in real life, like the races are a fairly decent length that it holds enough attention, but it doesn't kind of venture too much into the endurance category unless it's an explicit endurance race. And I feel that's actually pretty handy for the career mode, because it keeps it relatively fresh. I mean, just to kind of give a bit of information on that career mode, it isn't like Formula 1 where they're trying to improve the off-the-track elements of that game a lot to engage interest, so you're building up your team, you're getting upgrades. That isn't in Competizione at all by the looks of it. It's very much, as we say at the kind of start of the podcast, it's on the track that matters here. But because the on-the-track product is so good, I haven't minded the fact that the off-the-track stuff has been ignored, and this is something that me and you often discuss, Adam, in games, because there's examples of good off-the-track gameplay elements and then there's bad examples, and I'm very much on the side of if you can't do it right, don't bother. But we've talked about Dirt 4 for example, and how like you kind of enjoyed the elements they put in there and were a bit saddened they were removed from Dirt Rally 2. So how do you feel about Asseto's approach? Was it what you expected from a hardcore sim and you're fine with it? Or do you feel as if the whole like, create your own team and race thing, like because it's all about the track, you aren't really that fussed?
I think Kunos did it properly in Assetto. Because part of our problem with Dirt Rally 2.0 was that it was very... it was this kind of sheen on top of a career mode where they clearly didn't flesh it out. Codemasters, I think, did go to some pretty great lengths in Dirt 4 to make the career mode, the off-track experience, a lot more robust and interesting, and they stripped all of that away from Dirt Rally 2.0 while still ostensibly calling it a career mode and acting like those elements were part of it even though they weren't. And really all it was in 2.0 was just a nuisance. Which is a shame because as a result, like I have not gone back and played that game in probably like the better part of 2 months. I went to a friend's house recently and I played around with some of the DLC, which I don't have the season pass, so I haven't gotten to test out Germany or any of the new cars they've added or Monte Carlo. So I was doing that and I was like, this is a lot of fun. You know, there's no doubting Dirt Rally 2.0 is fantastic when you're actually playing it and you're on the stage. But yeah, it just seemed a little dishonest to maybe not dishonest, but I didn't really understand the reason to try and act like this game had a considerable, you know, single player element when it really didn't. So when I look at of course, Competizione, and it's very clear. I mean, like there's really not much for you to do outside of move on to the next race. But as you said, you know, the on-track product is very good, but unlike Dirt Rally 2.0, they went for the approach of, well, we're not doing that at all, so we're not going to pretend, you know, it's just not going to be a factor of the game, which I'm fine with, you know, because it's, you know, a lot of people would say that if you're going to add certain functionality to a game and it's not necessarily fleshed out or perfect, well, if it's not good, you don't have to play it. Like, this is the response I get a lot to, for example, a lot of the reason I didn't like Gran Turismo 5 was that it had all this ancillary crap that I didn't like, and people are like, well, if you don't like the rallying, which is terrible, don't play it. If you don't like the standard cars, don't drive them. And it's like, no, that doesn't really fly either. Like, it's a part of this, like, capsule experience, you know? It's a part of this produced object. It's a package, and like if every aspect of if an aspect of the package isn't up to a certain level of quality, I'm not just going to say like, oh, it doesn't matter because everything else is. Like, it's a comprehensive whole. So with the Assetto Corsa Competizione, Kunos definitely does not waste its time with things it doesn't believe in. It's very focused. That said, you know, it is a new release, a new PC sim in 2019, so there are a couple glitches and things here and there that I discovered. Like, I thought it was interesting how I accidentally I guess I sped in the pit lane on like my second race, but I don't know where I sped in the pit lane. I wrote about this in my story, and basically like I was coming in for my mandatory stop at Zolder, and I was able to pit successfully, no problems, but as soon as I tried to leave my stall, I was disqualified. And maybe I was going too fast on the entry. That's entirely possible, but usually my experience is that if you commit an act that causes a penalty, you will be penalized on the spot. So maybe the game was just waiting for my pit stop to be completed before it delivered the penalty. But I was disqualified. It said I was being in the pit lane. I was like, I've barely moved 3 feet since I parked. Like, what's going on? They spun the tires a little bit, so maybe they didn't like that. I don't know. But it was really funny. And then, unfortunately, the way the game is right now, you have to wait until the session ends before you can save and continue your career. So I just had to watch cars go around the track for 10 minutes until the race was over.
I mean, that's the difference really between these like proper hardcore PC sims and maybe something that's slightly neutered for console. There's a degree of raw simulation in here, in the sense that you were saying a minute ago about the way the sessions work. There is no way really to skip the session if you're in the middle of a race weekend, as it stands at the moment. But I've seen people complaining about this. You can't actually save a session after qualifying or after practice to do the race. You've got to do it all in the full Buna, which isn't
and that's
exactly
really
great.
I would say that's really frustrating because a lot of these Blancpain weekends are 2 races. So
yes,
if I want to do qualifying and then stop there and then pick up race 1 later, I can't do that. Or if I want to do race 1 and then wait for race 2, I can't do that either.
I don't think this is a conscious decision from Kunos to do this, or if it was, they've seen that people aren't too happy about it. So they're known to support their games really well on PC because they can roll out updates when and if they want. So I'm assuming that sort of functionality will be added, but yeah, there's definitely a few rough edges in here. I've got a pretty funny story myself where when I registered my Thrustmaster wheel at first, my T150, the pedals reversed for some reason in terms of like, the pressure. So when I started the first race basically of the career mode, and I hadn't used the wheel prior to that, my car just like continued on this straight line with full acceleration, and because I was on a straightaway anyway, I assumed it's because my foot was down. So it wasn't until I got to the first corner lifted my foot off the accelerator, the car just went straight into the chicane at Monza. It was hilarious. And yeah, and then there was the funny thing, when I fixed the accelerator, the brake pedal did that instead, so I had to fix the brake pedal as well. And there's a few things like that, and then what you would expect as well, given this is version 1.0 or even version 1.01 now, just to show how fast they're moving with it. There's been a few hard crash moments. Like I just, for a laugh, I tried to run a 28 car grid in the pouring rain at Spa on Ultra on my RX 590. The game just hard crashed, and it was that is not going to happen.
That's funny.
And that's just PC gaming though, and this is the thing, like, I will admit I'm a bit of a hypocrite here, because when stuff comes to console and that type of thing happens, I'm very unforgiving. I'm that guy. Like, I'm not a fan of stuff that ends up on console that has a lot of crashes or isn't quite got the polish, which is one of the reasons why I never got on with the original Assetto Corsa, funnily enough, because I felt as if the port didn't really justify coming to console because it still had a lot of the PC gaming kinks that can't be fixed through mods or through specific settings. But on PC, like, Competizione, by comparison to other sims, doesn't have a lot of issues because of its clear focus, as we've talked about. But there are still a few rough edges, but I think it's important to note that when you're actually in the zone playing it, it's brilliant. And even, we've not really talked about the graphics yet, but it's running on Unreal Engine 4, and it looks all the better for it. The kind of atmospheric lighting and the kind of spray from the weather effects is incredible.
Yeah, this is a really, really pretty game, and it runs really well. I have a 1070 card on the PC I just built, and a Ryzen 7 2700X. I don't know. I picked out the parts, but my friend built my PC because he knows more about that stuff than I do. But anyway, I'm able to run the game mostly on Epic, and it's gorgeous. I mean, it looks definitely looks better than GT Sport running on my PS4 Pro. And there are a couple frame drops here and there, but it's not the kind of stuff where, like, oh, there's a lot of, like, I'm in the rain and there's a lot of water spray and there's a lot of cars on track where I would think that there would be frame drops. It's more just like I'm the only car on track and there's always a drop around this one corner. So it might be more optimization level stuff.
Your Team Sonic Racing problem strikes again.
Right. But it's fun. I mean, like 90% of the time it runs really well, and it's beautiful. And you were talking a lot about the weather effects that struck you as very impressive when you started playing the game, and I'd have to agree. I mean, like, I am always disappointed by weather effects in a lot of racing games because I'm that guy who constantly beats the drum of, and I said this during our episode with Paul Roschinsky, that Drive Club has the best weather effects bar none of any game I've ever played, and that still might be true, but obviously it's not a simulator. So of course, Competizione's wet weather racing is just fabulous and a sight to behold, and obviously very difficult.
Oh yeah, incredibly difficult. We talked about the accessibility, but believe me, Eau Rouge in the rain is not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah, yeah.
The way the game renders the kind of transfer of grip going up that hill is probably one of the best singular moments I've seen in a sim. Like, the car just reacts exactly what you'd expect in a terrifying way, and trying to capture that is great. And yeah, the weather effects and even the time of day changes as well. There's a lot of effort in here, and it's great to see. I mean, one of the things that's really bummed me out about GT Sport is we still don't have those weather effects and time of day changes yet that were seemingly going to come. And as a result, I think in terms of an overall visual package, Assetto Corsa Competizione is definitely the better looking of the two. Even when it comes to lighting, which is like that's Polyphony's home court. You don't go after their lighting engine. I think Competizione gets really close, or even better in certain circumstances. Like the overcast weather, especially, randomly looks brilliant. Like, it's just clouds, but the way they kind of render the lighting of the cars and the environment, it really does look impressive.
Yeah, I would still say that Polyphony's lighting is probably unmatched. But that said, I mean, like, Assetto Corsa can do all of these things because it's running on PC hardware, and Polyphony is sort of capped. So, yeah, I mean, regardless, if you want to compare one game to another, they're better at different things. But ultimately, like, this is a beautiful game, and it really shows. And I like something you pointed out as we were talking about the rain. Before the show, was that it almost kind of does the Forza Motorsport 6 thing, and I guess 7 as well, where when you hit the puddles, you have the hydroplaning, but it's not that massively drawn out, like, theatrical, like,
yeah.
Oh my god, they've gone through a puddle and now the screen is sideways that you get in Forza 6. It's a lot more natural, but you obviously know when you're hydroplaning.
Yeah, exactly. I always remember in Forza 6, the first race you do in the rain, I think it's like a historic hot hatch series or something, and I was just blown away with how over the top the puddles were, because I remember them making a huge deal about it at E3. And
yeah, no,
like,
that was one of the game's big appeals, was the puddles, and how they also use the impact triggers on the Xbox One controller, because you go through the puddle and then you'd feel the trigger vibrate a certain way. And I mean, it's kind of cool. I mean, I guess because no game has tried to do that before, but it was also kind of funny because, like, Forza still to this day does not have dynamic weather. So it's like, it's not that having that feature doesn't matter, but I've always been of the mind that weather is only important in how it changes a race. And if weather can't roll in halfway through and change the way you strategize, well, then do we really need it in this game? Which is kind of why, like, it hasn't bothered me so much that Gran Turismo Sport doesn't have that feature, simply because clearly the way the lighting's been done in that game, it was not designed, at least on the PS4, with dynamic time of day and weather in mind. It just wasn't. I mean, like, the way they've done the different times of day that you can race in that game, all of the shadow information stuff is baked in. It's not necessarily real-time shadows, so I understand that. But yeah, I mean, that just makes you appreciate it all the more when you go and play a game like Assetto Corsa that can handle all of these things. And, you know, obviously it's a huge part of the GT3 Blancpain series because you're dealing with endurance races. So yeah, it all checks out.
Yeah, and like we've kind of iterated as well, this is just this is us experiencing our first brand new released PC sim.
Yeah, this is kind of a new ground for us because, I mean, our last episode was about Team Sonic Racing, so it's kind of funny how this show just goes from one extreme to another. But I mean, that's what it's all about. I mean, we play everything. And growing up, I didn't have a lot of exposure with PC sims, simply because I didn't play games on a PC literally until like 2 months ago. So, you know, over the years I've written about or I've talked about games or something like that. Like I have that like Mirror Mode series on GT Planet, and somebody will be like, why don't you write about like Richard Burns Rally? And I'm just like, I'd love to, but I can't. I never played that game before, and now maybe I can do something about that, but in the past I couldn't. Yeah, so on that note, what do you think? I mean, I don't, to be honest, I'm not super familiar with Kunos and how they operate. What would you like to see in terms of maybe not so much post-release content, but like things for them to prioritize as they continue to support the game after it comes out?
Well, one of the kind of big things they've already committed to is the 2019 update for the game, which will bring all the content from the 2019 Bloodborne series across. And I would like to see that used as a bounce board, almost like Spec 2.0 of Gran Turismo 5 at the time, where they kind of appreciably enhanced a lot of what the game actually offered. And I'd like to see the same here. The career mode is good for its purpose, but outside of an opening cutscene at the very start of the game, which does set the tone pretty nicely, it doesn't really carry that atmosphere forward any further. So I'm not sure, maybe just tweaks in that regard. Like most Sims, it's a bit barren outside of the racetrack in terms of atmosphere, so if they could find ways of making it feel more like a race event rather than just a sim, that'd be helpful as well.
I think that's fair enough. You know, a 2019 update to start would be fantastic. And as someone who's used to console games, you know, I have to admit, like, I do like some of that sheen and polish and unnecessary, sort of unnecessary stuff off the track, but at the same time, I understand that it's not what this game is, and it's fine. I mean, honestly, I get enough of a kick out of how before you start the race in this game, you can actually hear like commentators talking over the PA system at the track. Yeah, which, having really cool. Been to a handful of races in my life, that's like such a that's something that I always associate with being in a racetrack atmosphere, is hearing, I don't know, John Hindar, whoever it is, over the PA system at the track talking to somebody, and it just puts you in the mindset, in the place of being at the track. So I think that's a cool little touch that they left in this game.
Yeah, definitely. It's good to see that they have paid some attention to that at the moment, and any other changes and that extra bit of polish would be well appreciated as well. And even on the subject of sound, we haven't covered how accurate the sound design is here for the cars. It sounds incredible. Like when you're in the cockpit and you can just hear all the different rattles and stuff around you, and the way the engine reacts to harsh braking and stuff. It's just it's one of the best sounding racing games I've played in a long time.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, I'm not ever really impressed with engine noise in games. Where I find that the sound profile sort of surprises me and interests me is in all of those little things that you hear aside from the engine noise, like the way the car sounds when it picks up marbles and goes over the curbs and things like that, and like the drivetrain line and whatnot, and the Assetto Corsa Competizione totally nails all of those things. I mean, my friends kind of make fun of me because I would always say that I never really cared about the fact that Gran Turismo's audio was so poor, and they'd be like, well, do you not have ears? Like, do you not understand? I'm just like, no, I'm just like, I just don't care. Like, to be honest, like, okay, cars sound like a vacuum cleaner. I like music, and I'm just always listening to music, so I really don't care. And then I'll go to a race with them, and they'll be able to tell what car is coming around the corner if we go like a, not different than Blancpain actually, because we used to go to the IMSA races in the US, but we'd be at a race at Lime Rock Park, and they would know whether it was a Corvette or a 911 coming around the corner, which in retrospect is not that difficult to tell. I mean, there's a small block V8 is totally different than the flat 6, but when I went there and I couldn't tell, they were just amazed. They're like, how can you not tell between these two cars just based on sound alone? So I don't know. I think growing up, like, video games gave me sort of a poor idea of the way racing actually sounds and the way cars actually sound at speed, and it's only after playing games like Assetto Corsa and even Project Cars has had some pretty good sound design as well, that I've been able to appreciate that and listen for it now. And Assetto Corsa, definitely if you have a good pair of headphones for your computer, or like a good gaming headset, like it's a fantastic, like, totally surrounding, audio experience.
And that's what's made the difference for me as well. Like when I play on my TV, I'm not really that bothered. I'm quite like yourself, Adam. Even if I'm playing on the monitor with speakers, as long as it sounds good, that's fair enough. But it's been through using the headphones that I've got like a decent set, and hearing the way that the sound is modelled across almost like a 3D plane. Like that's what makes the difference here. It's just hearing the marbles, like you said, when you go over a slight curb. It isn't like the kind of overbearing brrr noise that would typically be in racing games. You actually hear like the slight vibrations. And when, oh man, driving in the rain is so cathartic. Like, you're just chilled out to the max sometimes when you hear that the rain kind of bouncing off the roof while you're controlling this 800 horsepower beast. But like, it's just, it's a good driving experience in terms of the sound design in that weather.
Yeah, I also wanted to bring up, you were impressed by the way that the game handles sort of the in-car, the cockpit view. I guess mostly based on the rotation of the wheel, because a lot of other racing games sort of dampen it or lessen it, and it's not actually 1-to-1, but in the Assetto Corsa Competizione it is, and I think that's more of like it's more of a PC sim thing, right, than anything else, but still contributes to the experience.
Yeah, exactly. As someone who was a console peasant for so long, not my words, that's the PC Master Race talking. Like, it was interesting to see that in the cockpit, because it wasn't something I was used to. And then even when you use that combined with the kind of, you get different camera views, and one of them's from inside the driver's helmet, and that looks incredibly realistic at times when you've got that like race car restricted front window. You're trying to drive the car through these tight corners and amongst cars. When you combine with how realistic the wheel looks as it moves, with the sound, and just the general feeling of claustrophobia you can get in certain corners, such as Monza's famous first few corners, you do get that experience that this is a game that was made to accurately reflect the driving as much as possible, and not something that maybe some would say is a bit buzzwordy in the driver journey. This is actually about the driver itself, because when you're driving these cars, it's easy to forget sometimes that it's a simulation, because everything you expect to happen in the car does happen. As far as I'm concerned, it's one of the most accurate sims I've played, and I don't mean that in the sense of difficulty that you would show off that you can drive in it, but in the sense that this is a car and it kind of reacts to the road the way you would expect, even when you're driving like what is basically a supercar essentially that's been tuned for the Blancpain series.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the cockpit view, like from inside the driver's helmet, because that's the helmet cam is a one thing that I'm kind of surprised in this game, because it does seem pretty like theatrical and over dramatic, which doesn't necessarily gel with the whole realistic simulation vibe. Also, the amount of time I've tried to play in that view is just like, it's almost like driving with like drunk goggles on or something like that. Like, because your head is moving in a totally, I mean, okay, I've never actually driven a car like this, but like, it's pretty exaggerated. Like, when you go through a corner, all of a sudden you're like, your field of vision is like drifting out towards the left. It becomes a little disconcerting. So that was something that I very quickly had to avoid. And the 1-to-1 steering, I imagine it's great if you have a wheel. I actually don't like it, simply because if you're using a controller, and I understand, again, this game is not made for me, but if you're using a controller, it can be very, very just overwhelming visually to see something spinning in front of you constantly. I mean, I understand that that's actually what's happening in the car, so it's fine. But I was very impressed with the abilities that they give you to customize where you position the camera in every single view, and I was even able to achieve like this chase cam, which I'm very picky about things like this, but in a lot of racing games I feel like today the chase cam just isn't right, and I was able to get it exactly how I wanted through the preferences in the game. So I've got my chase cam set up the way I want. I've got the interior cam and the view from basically on top of the bumper but still outside the car, or on top of the hood. So all of that I think is really important for to make you feel as comfortable as you want to in the car, which you won't be able to perform as well as you can unless that's the case.
Yeah, exactly, and you'll have to share those settings with me because it sounds like you've come onto a winner there, because the default chase cam for me, or rather just behind the car cam, if we're going to be honest, um, it's a bit rigid for my liking. Kind of follows GT Sport more than, say, Forza, for example, that has a bit more kind of pan to the car, but yeah, the kind of the fact you can customise that's great. On a kind of similar note, but as a more negative aspect, I do feel as if the heads-up display is a little bit overbearing in this game.
There's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of information, and then if you go into the kind of seasonal time trials that are available as well, the special events, I think they're called, you've got a, you've got a mini leaderboard as well, taking up even more space in that scenario. And you can remove certain elements, but they seem tied to each other, so sometimes if you turn off one element, it will turn off another you might not have wanted to have seen disappear. And even surprisingly, from what I can tell, you can't actually change where the HUD elements are displayed on the screen, which is a bit of a surprise because, as far as I know, that's something you can do in Assetto Corsa, even on the console.
I think that's something a lot of PC sims actually give you the ability to do. Even Project Cars on the PS4 gives you the ability to move elements around the screen. I think the issue with the HUD in this game, and it's something I've always been very mindful of because I really appreciate graphic design and things like that, is that it isn't very efficient in terms of the way it uses space. Like, if you think about all of the information that Polyphony crams into your screen when you play GT Sport, I mean, it's a ton of stuff, but they use the space pretty efficiently. Now, there are a lot of people who complain that even that game is overbearing, and I understand, like, it can be a little overwhelming, but I think they maximize the information that you want on the screen and the fact that all of it is necessary, but it doesn't take up too much room. Whereas in this game, towards the bottom left, you kind of have the timing and scoring, and it's just a lot of space devoted to the timing and scoring, which... and like, it doesn't need to be that big.
Yeah, exactly.
And then on the opposite side of the screen, the opposite corner, the top right, you have, as you touched on earlier, you have your safety ratings and things like that. But the thing is, there are so many abbreviations and so many numbers, I have no idea what half these ratings are. Like, I know what my safety rating is, but like, what are the other 5 things that are apparently denoted on that corner of the screen? I have no idea. So it would be nice if it was a little bit more... if it was communicated in a little bit more of an elegant fashion. But again, these are things that I'm willing to look the other way on, given the premise of the game and given that we are talking about a PC title. But nevertheless, it's something that if they wanted to iterate upon it and improve it in future updates, I would have no problem with that.
Yeah, that top right of the screen for me, it's just gibberish as far as I'm concerned. That's what I was hinting at earlier when I was talking about the driver ratings. I know it's related to that because sometimes the numbers change if you're driving clean, that type of thing, but the game doesn't go out its way to explain that to you. And even more offensive from a design point of view, the numbers are always visible, all of them in the top corner. It's not as if one changes it flashes up in the top corner, and maybe that would have been a better way of doing it. But it just seems as if there's a lot of real estate up there to stuff that, I mean, it doesn't have to be on the screen at all times, maybe. I mean, you could even get an update in the pause menu or after a race to show you the differences, but it feels like it's just another layer on top of the content on the screen. If you play with the camera view that has the rear view mirror as well, it's like this tiny box in the middle that you can see what you're actually looking at in terms of driving, but there's so much stuff. And even when your kind of race chief's talking to you and stuff, it comes up with subtitles at the bottom, so you lose a bit of that. And yeah, I get it, there's a lot of information to display, especially in a game that's trying to replicate a real life motorsport series which has its kinks it needs to show, but there's a lot of stuff here, and I mean, it's not all bad. That sounds really negative, because I like the fact you've got a constantly live kind of lap time differentiator as well, so you can see exactly where you're losing time and where exactly you're gaining it. But that's one of those things that looks cool, but when you consider the way that racing works, you are going to lose some time at certain parts of the track, so it just seems as if it's taking space up just for the sake of it.
Yeah, plus, I mean, let's not forget that people are playing mostly with wheels, and wheels usually have a lot of buttons to be able to access different functions and things like that. And on top of that, some people even have their setup where they've got their keyboard nearby. So there are ways that you could have almost like a GT Sports multifunction display where you've got a corner of the screen that will display timing and scoring, and then it will display your lap time if you move over one, and then it might give you your TCS or something like that, and then it'll change to a radar. Like Gran Turismo does a lot of these things, and I understand it's not the only game, but it's the one I think that does it the best. And it lets you, customize the experience to, again, what makes you comfortable and what doesn't take your attention away from the task at hand. So all of these things would be great if Kunos would care to implement them. But I feel like the nature of the PC sim is that customizability is desired to a certain extent, but it's not about being slick, and I understand that. I mean, this is going to be like a super Adam on time extend nitpick, but it does bother me whenever I start playing a game and I'm like, you're using Google's Roboto font, which is the same font that is used in both Project Cars and pretty much all of Codemaster's recent racing games that aren't F1. And I'm just like, would you maybe just like, it's like when you go to like write up a document or something like that, or if you're in college, if you're doing a school project, or if you're, I don't know, if you're writing a resume or something like that, like just change the font from like Arial. Like, I know it's not totally necessary, and it might not matter to everybody, but just to show that you put a little bit of thought into it, just change it from the free font. I don't know.
Yeah, just use Comic Sans.
Yeah, exactly. Use Comic Sans. If they use Comic Sans, at least it would have been like, they thought about it. They didn't just like use what they look at every day on their phone. But that's me. I know nobody wants to hear that, so.
I mean, it's those type of things people do want to hear in Time Extendo. Like, we talk about this stuff because those tiny little elements added up to one of the best arcade racing games ever, for example. And Gran Turismo's level of polish makes it so loved. And I know that's not what a Competizione is trying to do at all. Like, it's not trying to make us think, oh, remember how great that font was. But like, it helps, and this is why bringing this up isn't necessarily a negative, because I feel as if you've had to go to the level of a nitpick to kind of give a proper complaint about the polish they have so far, it shows that they've actually put a decent amount of care in, maybe an amount you wouldn't have expected. I mean, I'm not sure if that's what you did expect coming into the game, but in terms of the overall presentation and the way it's set up, it's one of the better sims out there for sure.
I mean, I have to say, like, when you're selecting your car, they have a really great system of you choose the car, and then you choose the team, and then you choose the number, basically the entrant, and then that will show you the drivers that are linked to that entrant, and that's such a great way of drilling down, because if there's anything that annoys, I think, a lot of racing game fans and sim racing fans, is that every separate livery of a car in Gran Turismo is registered as a different car, and that's not doing anybody any favors except maybe the car count. So I like that it's like, oh, I want to drive a Nissan GTR. Okay, here are all of the Nissan GTRs from the various different Blancpain, the different years that they ran and whatnot. And I also think it's cool that they'll have different years of chassis of a car as well. So I noticed that they have like the 2015 Nismo GTR, and then they have like the 2017 one or something. So stuff like that is really cool, and obviously it helps now that we live in a time where Ferrari and Porsche are not as stingy about their licenses as they used to be. So this game has every car, and obviously it's a full license for Blancpain, so it has all of the teams and stuff, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely, and I mean, that is the thing, we're talking about boosting the car count, and it kind of brings it back to that main point that we aren't saying that this game is the best sim out there for everybody, because I see, just as a reference point, I seen somebody on Facebook comment on Assetto Corsa's page like GT3 cars are boring. It's like, why did you buy this fucking
Yeah, it's
game
like,
in the
then
first
just don't
place?
play the game. Like, that's, if it's boring, it's like complaining about the fact that NASCAR sucks and you've bought NASCAR Heat 2018 or whatever. Just don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, even though the name doesn't explicitly include the Blank Pound series, which is a bit of a surprise, to be honest.
Well, no, it kind of does, because like right underneath the logo it says the official Blancpain GT series game.
I mean, it does say that, but like what I meant was like they haven't been like kind of forced to call it Blancpain GT3 or anything like that. It's very much an Assetto Corsa game, so I think that the people complaining are those people that absolutely love the original, and they see this as the second Assetto Corsa. Now, that might be the case, but in terms of getting an experience like Assetto Corsa, I'm sure Kunos aren't done with that side of things, but in this game, they wanted to create a focused racing sim, and they do it, and I mean, this is, if you're having an Adam nitpick, I'm going to have a Brendan hot take that you would expect to find on Time Extend, by saying that this is very much a sim racer made for people who love arcade racers, and not in the sense of the handling, but just in terms of the content and where you'll find longevity and replayability, because you've only got like 11 tracks and a certain amount of cars that is probably pretty small by most game standards, but you're getting that kind of focused experience that will keep you coming back for more, and that's the difference between an Assetto Corsa Competizione and Dirt Rally 2.0, for example. Because what Assetto was trying to achieve, it does it very well, and there's scope to improve. Whereas when Dirt Rally 2.0 came out, it felt as if it was lacking in certain areas, and there was also a worry that they wouldn't fix it up, especially when certain elements of that were confirmed, such as DLC not being in the career mode and stuff like that. The difference is right now, Competizione does a great job of what it's trying to achieve with the GT3 series. And who knows, if in a Time Extend episode in a year's time we revisited the game, I'm willing to bet that it could only have improved by then.
Yeah, and we have a lot of racing games now that try to cater to fans of every single type of discipline, and you've got your road cars and your race cars, you have Group C cars from the 90s and the 80s, and then you've got your GT3 cars and your hybrid prototypes. Like, a lot of games do this, you know. Project Cars does it, Assetto Corsa 1 did it, Forza and Gran Turismo do it, arguably to a less realistic extent, but they still do, you know. It's really refreshing to see a game that just tries to do one thing that isn't F1, because it just doesn't happen anymore. It used to happen all the time, like growing up, you know, you like, as we were saying, as I started the show, you had your Toka games and whatnot, and but there was, I think, a shift around the time, probably towards the end of the last decade with Grid and whatnot, when maybe the racing genre was sort of seeing a downturn, or not so much a downturn, but games became a lot more expensive to make. So it's like, well, if nobody's going to make the dedicated GTR experience, well then, you know, if nobody can afford to make that, if games are very expensive and whatnot, then I guess we should just try and roll in as many licenses into one title as possible. And that's how you end up with stuff like GT5, which is like literally overflowing with various licenses and doesn't use any of them well at all, which is why when we have our Gran Turismo discussion, GT5 has to finish last. There's just no question about it. But that's another topic. But yeah, so I love to see games like Competizione exist, and I hope we see more of them. You know, I didn't realize that Blancpain GT had kind of become like the prevailing GT3 series around the world. I mean, there is still an FIA GT3, right? But this isn't it. So I think it's kind of strange that the series that is most associated with the watchmaker has become the one that I guess matters the most. But racing is always changing, so.
It's that, I think at least some of it comes down to that accessibility. We've been kind of hammering home throughout the whole pod, like, because of the wide range of competitors, you'll end up with some crazy crashes that go viral on YouTube and stuff, and then you get the driver success story, somebody appears out of nowhere and absolutely blitzes the series. Like, there's a lot of potential for drama, whereas maybe in the FIA GT3 series it's that very much kind of closed door type of racing where it is all great drivers, but maybe ironically that's to the detriment of trying to get that success that Blackpool has. And I mean, I can't believe this game exists, to be honest.
Why is that? Why is that?
Just in the sense that, I mean, you think about the racing genre, and if you look at the first few episodes of Time Extend, we talked at length about how the rally game was the crutch. It's easy to make a rally game of any capacity, sim, arcade, whatever it would be. Like, it was a good way to generate some sales, and it seemed like the safe bet. And then, like, outside of Gran Turismo Sport, some of the other kind of more circuit racing focused games were starting to see downturns in sales. Formula 1, as you've mentioned, being the only kind of main licensed game getting a lot of sales, because even in WRC, which is Rally itself, that doesn't experience great sales. It just keeps plugging on based on European interest, I think. And like, out of nowhere, a small indie developer at the time in Kunos get the license to work on a Blackpool GT3 game, and it won't be some cash-in that's released within a year or a project that's announced never sees the light of day, but it will be an ambitious but incredibly focused Unreal Engine 4 powered circuit racing game. Like, when you think about it like that, you've got to admit it's pretty impressive, really.
No, that's true, because for so long we were dealing with these licensed racing games that were god awful. I mean, like, I guess people are fond of the WRC series now, but wherever the WRC series went after Evolution Studios had it was terrible, and that game, those games won't get good for a number of years. We've had awful NASCAR games. I mean, I'm not into NASCAR, so I don't play them, but they're usually pretty bad, made by developers who don't really appreciate the source material of what they're trying to do. So yeah, no, that makes total sense. Like, it's definitely the perfect match of the studio and the development talent that's interested in this franchise, and, you know, the right franchise to find a home. It's a very good match. I think we all had similar feelings. I remember I was so stoked when I learned at this point 10 years ago, which is crazy to think about, that F1 was landing at Codemasters, because it just seemed so perfect. Like, I mean, not that Sony Liverpool did a terrible job with it, but it had stopped releasing games for a number of years, and then not all of those games would come out in all parts of the world. So in the US, we would never get F1 games, we would never get WRC games, and that sucked. And now, thanks to the internet and distribution becoming a lot easier, I can play any game that releases anywhere, and it's a beautiful thing. So maybe this is a sign of things to come. And I'm sure people who, in terms of, you know, getting more specialized racing games, and I'm sure people who did like the first Assetto Corsa will get, you know, a true Assetto Corsa sequel in due time. Because, I mean, look at Grid. That's always what seems to happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just let us have our hyper-focused racing game for once. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And I hope in some capacity it does make it to consoles. I understand right now it's pretty much a no-go because of how good the game looks plus the physics engine. But if rumours about the PS5 and the next box, which I'll just call it for now, are to be believed, then they're going to be pretty powerful machines. And I think there'll be a community interested in this game, because I don't know if you read the reviews of like Assetto Corsa when it first came out on the consoles, but seeing like kind of main outlets trying to review that sim as a game was just like, it was an absolute bomb site basically, because rightfully enough they were like, where is this, where is that, like kind of common console racer elements, it just wasn't there. But I can imagine something like this doing incredibly well in terms of reviews, because, well, people who don't play racing games will be able to drive the cars, which is always a positive. And it's got gameplay elements to it too.
Yeah, I think this will definitely see a console release in due time. I mean, the fact that consoles today are more like PCs than they've ever been, and the fact that next generation is coming, you know, we're probably less than 2 years out from it now, and when it does arrive, those are those systems are going to be, in some ways, actually more sophisticated than a lot of the PCs you see now. If you've been paying attention to what Sony intends to do with fast storage and was it UFS 4 or whatever, basically just making it so it can stream insane amounts of data at one time. So I think this'll, if it doesn't happen this generation, it'll happen next generation.
And I think that's a good way to close it. It's close our thoughts, I should say. We've talked at length about this game for a full hour, an hour bordering on 10 minutes, and I think that highlights that it does meet some of that criteria we consider special, because there are a lot of racing sims out there that try to do the same thing, and there's plenty of great content creators that cover that off in terms of like the physics and stuff, and go into levels of detail we probably couldn't fathom. But in terms of the stuff we look for in games, like you've said, Competizione is definitely along that lines, and that's why we were eager to get this pod out as well. Like, even though we recorded one last week and it's a busy June, we felt as if this is a game that, while it's still got that kind of release hype, that we should talk about, because it does actually hit all the points that if you listen to every pod from the start, it pretty much it's on the right wavelength of what we want to see going forward in the racing genre. Almost a reset to the focused times, but you also get those adventurous games like Gran Turismo and Forza as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not ultimately, if you're a type of person who doesn't enjoy sim racing, I can't definitively say that you should go out and play this game. It is a sim racer, but I would say that if you're interested in dabbling in sim racing, I think what Kunos has done is probably the perfect place to start. I mean, this game doesn't overwhelm you and inundate you with content and all these different disciplines. It's very focused. It's go GT3 racing, it's basically it. So if you're new to sim racing, if you want to try it, I think Competizione is the perfect starting point, or as perfect a starting point as there's ever been. Obviously, it would help when it lands on consoles, but if you have a PC right now, and also the game I think is a little bit cheaper, at least at the time when it came out, I think it was like $10 or $15 cheaper as part of the launch. So if you're interested in dipping your toes into this genre, I think it's a good starting point. For sure, and it's only going to get more updates from here that will hopefully make it a better experience too. All right, so that was a fun little discussion, and as we said before, we've got a busy June, so we probably won't see you again until July. But the year is going so fast. Like I said, I think I was talking on GT Plant to somebody or something like that, and I said, before we know it, it's gonna be September. Grid's gonna be here, so. And we only do like two shows a month anyway, so in like 5 episodes we're gonna be talking about Grid. Oh man, and we do have a lot planned as well in the pipeline at the moment. We did formally announce our new feature we'll be hoping to get to as well. 7 out of 10 racers would drive again. Great name, by the way. And we've still got, oh thanks man, I knew you'd like it. And we've also got Sega Racing Studio. We will play every Dreamcast racing game, of course. We want to do another top 10 as well, don't we, soon? Or rather, top list of games in the series. The Ridge Racer one was very fun. Well, yeah, we want to do another one. There's also the Gran Turismo fight, publicized live podcast fight that we're going to have amongst us and some people from GTP. So there's a lot that's going to happen that we have to cram into this summer. So to fill the void of, I don't really think there's any other racing game to look forward to until Grid. So that's why, I guess. If you need your time extend fix, we do come in spirit with every pre-owned Dreamcast on eBay. So buy a Dreamcast on eBay and just play through the games you might have not played through on there, specifically Le Mans 24 Hour, or Adam will get very sad. That's true. If you tweet us a picture of your Dreamcast and the copy of Le Mans 24, we will retweet it. That's just part and parcel of what we do. We are legally obliged to retweet it, so feel free. I like that. All right, everybody. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the coming weeks. Cheers, guys.